Let's say China.
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 China. China.
There are next door neighbors, and you can actually see Russia from land here in Alaska.
You go over to China.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Trump statement, tweeting out insults to Angela Merkel. What's he doing?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host.
Yes. Hello, and welcome. I am James Andrews, and you are listening to So This Happened, the only news you need if you have a peanut stuck in your throat, like I do right now. It is Monday, the 6th of November, 2017, and what a weekend. From Donald Trump being all the way over in Asia, to a Saudi prince being killed in a helicopter accident, to Rand Paul getting his ribs broken during an assault, to yesterday's horrific shooting in a church. And I hate doing shows on days like today because it seems I can't find anything good to talk about. I mean, everything today is overshadowed by the news of the shooting in Texas, and quite rightly so. It was a terrible tragedy, and we will get to it. I have a few thoughts on it, as I'm sure many people do. But first, Rand Paul, who on Saturday was attacked in his own front garden by a man, 59-year-old Rene Boucher, who claims the attack had absolutely nothing to do with politics, and it was just over a trivial matter. Mr. Boucher was released on $7,500 bail on Saturday, and so far only faces misdemeanor charges. So we put our heads together and thought, what would you attack Rand Paul for if it wasn't politics? Well, here is our list. Number 1. Rand Paul was outside mowing his lawn, and he had the mower blade set to 2. And we all know that winter is approaching, and you need the blade to be on at least 3, 4, or 5, so that over the winter the grass doesn't become too cold and die. That potentially could be a reason to assault him. Number 2. Rand Paul was wearing odd socks. Now, I know that might seem like a very little thing to you or I, but perhaps Mr. Boucher looked down and said, that sock has a red pattern in, but that sock has a distinct blue pattern. What the fuck are you doing wearing 2 different pairs of socks? You need to be assaulted. Number 3. Rand Paul was picking up dog poo that some unimaginable dog owner decided to leave in his front yard, but rather than wrap it up in plastic and put it in the garbage like everybody else would do, Rand Paul merely picked it up and threw it out onto the street. That would definitely be grounds for assault. And finally, the reason Rand Paul maybe was assaulted on Saturday. He was out in his yard, which is in Kentucky, remember, wearing a New York Giants football jersey. And as any good person from Kentucky will tell you, that is definitely grounds for getting the shit kicked out of you. And in all seriousness, we never condone violence in any way, shape or form on So This Happened. And whatever happened there, Mr. Boucher probably does deserve to go to prison, or at least face some pretty stiff fines. And now on to Fox News. Today, it has been announced by Ofcom. Now, if you don't know what Ofcom is, it's a communications regulator in the UK. It was an Act of Parliament in 2003, which sort of looks at what's on television and decides whether or not it should be permitted. Well, they found out today that Fox News has been in breach of a number of Ofcom rules over impartiality. This all stems from a January edition of the Sean Hannity programme. Yes, that human genital wart. and it found that the program was entirely pro-Donald Trump and did not sufficiently reflect alternative viewpoints. Now, we all know that Sean Hannity has no viewpoints. He gets out there as a puppet for Donald Trump and says what he wants, but according to Ofcom, this breaks the rule of impartiality. Now, they did go on to say that it is not a main source of news in the UK. However, we were also mindful that, in our view, this particular program dealt with major matters relating to current public policy that, as well as being of international significance, were of particular relevance and significance to UK viewers. And they didn't stop with Sean Hannity. They also mentioned Tucker Carlson, who found that his program had been in breach for a broadcast in May following the Manchester terror attack. Now, whether breaking Ofcom rules or not has anything to do with the fact that as of the 1st of November, Sky, which is the satellite provider broadcasting Fox News, decided to axe the channel completely and you can no longer view it in the UK. But they should have seen it coming, shouldn't they? When Fox stopped using the fair and balanced moniker underneath all their programs, Ofcom should have just looked at this and said, they're not even pretending anymore, are they? They're just going out there and saying, yeah, we're not fair, we're not balanced, we love Donald Trump, and we're just going to say everything positive about him. So anyway, there we go. No more Fox News in the UK. Well, that can only be a good thing. One thing that is not a good thing is, if you'll remember from about a week or so ago, there was a photograph of a lady riding her bicycle in Virginia, and the presidential motorcade was going past and she stuck her middle finger up, and the photograph was taken from behind and it became something of a viral photograph that went all over social media. It was quite a funny image, actually. Anyway, unfortunately, the lady says that she has been fired from her job for doing that. She works for a company called Akima, and she posted this picture as one of her online profiles, and she was called into a meeting where HR said that they classified the image as lewd or obscene and therefore deemed that it was against the social media policies that the company had. Now, Julie Briskman, who was the lady in the photograph, argued that she was not at work at the time. It was on a weekend and she was in her free time. However, the company stood by it and said, you are an employee of this company and anything you post on social media directly reflects upon us, and sticking your middle finger up at the president is not something we want to portray. And Miss Briskman, for what it's worth, we at So This Happened salute your efforts to stick your finger up at the President of the United States. And, well, we're sorry you lost your job, but we love the photograph. So, I'm torn on this story because I'm glad the photograph's up. I'm sorry you lost your job. Am I more glad the photograph is up? I don't know. Maybe. I might be. Yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry you lost your job, Miss Briskman. But we take our hat off to you for what it's worth. And now, unfortunately, we have to move on to this.
Let me begin today by addressing the horrific shooting in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and families of today's horrible and murderous attack. This act of evil occurred as the victims and their families were in their place of sacred worship. We cannot put into words the pain and grief we all feel, and we cannot begin to imagine the suffering of those who lost the ones they so dearly loved. Our hearts are broken, but in dark times, and these are dark times, such as these, Americans do what they do best. We pull together. We join hands, we lock arms, and through the tears and through the sadness, we stand strong, oh so strong. My administration will provide its full support to the great state of Texas and all local authorities investigating this horrible crime. I've spoken just a few minutes ago with Governor Abbott, and we offer our thanks to the first responders the FBI, all of the many people involved, both federal and otherwise. Ultimately, they stopped the suspect and rendered immediate life-saving aid to certain victims of the shooting. I will continue to follow the developments closely. All of America is praying to God to help the wounded and the families of the victims. We will never, ever leave their side. Ever.
So there was President Donald Trump in Japan addressing the media right after the horrific shootings in Texas, which claimed the lives of 26 people in a church. The gunman, who we are not going to name because we believe in absolutely no notoriety for these idiots, was killed at the scene. How he died is a little bit of a mystery right now. Whether he took his own life, whether the police got him, or whether another person shot him down is unknown. It's an awful event. Words can't describe how terrible it is. Unfortunately, it's a kind of event that we seem to be getting used to. Every single week, there seems to be another shooting somewhere. We had Las Vegas just recently, now we've got Texas. It just seems to never end. Now, the speech the president gave there was actually very good. I'm not going to criticize him for it in any way. It was what you would expect a president to say. The only problem is, we know how Donald Trump has responded to other things in the past. And so by taking this one speech and having it in isolation, it sounds quite nice. And you say, yeah, that's very presidential. But then you start to think back to just last week in New York City, where before he even got the full facts, he was calling and crying for the death penalty for this animal, this monster. And we're not seeing that same reaction from him here in Texas, where more people were killed. Now, the skeptical, cynical person amongst us might say, well, the shooter was white, James. He wasn't a brown individual, James. He was born in America, James. He wasn't born overseas and immigrated to America, James. And I have to agree with you. I can't argue with that. When Donald Trump calls for the death penalty for an animal because he was a brown immigrant, but when a white madman shoots up a church, Donald Trump doesn't call for the death penalty. I mean, he's dead, but doesn't call him an animal, doesn't call him any of the names that he called the immigrant. These are both terrorism. I don't care how you look at it. Whether you want to call it Islamic terrorism or not, this is just as much terrorism as the New York City attacks were, perhaps even more, because there was a higher casualty rate. But we're not hearing anyone from the administration utter the word terrorism. You can call it domestic terrorism if you want, but this is an act of terrorism. And then, of course, we move on to the other big issue when something like this happens. And that has to be gun control, right? This was a man that walked into a church with a gun and killed 26 people. Who is to blame for that, if not the gun? Now, I know the man pulled the trigger, but if he didn't have the gun, this wouldn't have happened. And then this, unfortunately, is where Donald Trump's nice speech from the beginning turns into a bullshit speech, because right after he'd said those nice words, someone asked him whether gun control would be something he'd be willing to look at, and this is how he responded.
I think that mental health is your problem here. This was a very, based on preliminary reports, very deranged individual, a lot of problems over a long period of time. We have a lot of mental health problems in our country, as do other countries. But this isn't a guns situation. I mean, we could go into it, but it's a little bit soon to go into it. But fortunately, somebody else had a gun that was shooting in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it would have been as bad as it was. It would have been much worse. But this is a mental health problem at the highest level. It's a very, very sad event. These are great people and a very, very sad event. But that's the way I view it. Thank you.
This isn't a guns situation. That, in many ways, just leaves me speechless. Was this man mentally deranged? Perhaps. Doesn't change the fact that he had a gun and he was able to get a gun, and we can almost guarantee that he obtained that gun legally. So, how the President of the United States can say, this isn't a guns situation? What the fuck is it then, Donald? Seriously, what the fuck is it if it isn't a guns situation? Unbelievable. Anyway, that is the end of the show. We're out of time, unfortunately. It was a good conversation, and if you do want to continue this on Twitter, we can do that. That'd be great. Talk about this more. Hopefully, the politicians will start talking about it now too. Anyway, listen, we will do this all over again tomorrow. Take care and have a great night. Peace.